Tonight on Reporting Scotland, the majority of MSPs give cross-party support to the First Minister as she seeks to maintain Scotland's links with the EU.
My starting point is to protect Scotland's interests and to protect our relationship with the EU.
Support for Scotland in the European Parliament. We have a report from Brussels where Nicola Sturgeon is due tomorrow. Also in the programme, one of the 3 panel members on the Scottish Child Abuse Inquiry quits, accusing the government of interference. The Baby Ashes scandal, the leadership of Aberdeen City Council under mounting pressure after yesterday's damning report. And Andy Murray makes a flying start to Wimbledon, breezing through to the second round in straight sets. Good evening. MSPs have given a mandate to the First Minister so she can seek to protect Scotland's relationship with the European Union. A process of shuttle diplomacy will now begin, with Nicola Sturgeon going to Brussels tomorrow. Labour, the Greens and the Liberal Democrats backed the government, although the Conservatives abstained, citing concerns about another Scottish independence referendum. Our political editor Brian Taylor was watching the debate.
Outside Parliament, marshalled by Greens, demonstrators make their point.
We are European and we're staying European, and that's the message we expect to hear with as much unity as possible from inside that Parliament.
Yes, but how? Inside the corridors of devolved power, Nicola Sturgeon is searching for answers.
First Minister.
She said if Scotland could maintain EU links, it could build an economic lead over the rest of the UK.
It is my intention that we will secure continued access to the single market for Scotland. If in the circumstances the UK is now in, Scotland does find a way to maintain our relationship with the EU, as I am determined we will, then Scotland will become an even more attractive place to do business.
The First Minister has asked Anton Muscatelli, the principal of Glasgow University, to head an expert panel seeking ideas for sustaining EU links. Ms Sturgeon said today's debate was emphatically not about independence, but the Tories scented an emerging threat to another union, that of the UK.
You do not dampen the shockwaves caused by one referendum by lighting the fuse for another, nor by saying that the economic impact of leaving one union means you should sever ties with a greater union whose value in trade eclipses the former many times over.
It's easy to listen.
And Leave supporter Oliver Mundell went further.
Behind the seemingly good intentions lies a deliberate malice. If they were serious about building consensus and negotiating in good faith, then they would have taken a second referendum off the table.
Thank you, Presiding Officer.
In turn, Willie Rennie attacked the Tories. He said hard-working families would suffer.
It is ordinary people on low and modest incomes who will lose. These are the victims of this crisis.
I call Kezia Dugdale.
Labour's Kezia Dugdale tried to understand why people voted Leave while condemning the leaders of that campaign.
The Leave campaign contains some of the worst dog whistle, racism and xenophobia I have heard in my life. But that does not make every Leave voter a xenophobe or a right-winger.
Yes, 92, no, 0, and there were 31 abstentions. The motion is therefore agreed.
In the vote, Nicola Sturgeon secured her mandate to open direct talks with the EU, with only the Conservatives abstaining.
Well, there was plenty of goodwill towards Scotland on show at a meeting of the European Parliament today. But can that be converted into action? Our political correspondent Glenn Campbell reports from Brussels.
Coming together to work out how best to part. As David Cameron arrived in Brussels for Brexit talks with EU leaders, the European Parliament was debating the UK's decision to withdraw, with one Scottish representative highlighting the Remain vote in Scotland and appealing to MEPs for help to maintain Scotland's EU links.
Colleagues, there is a lot of things to be negotiated. We will need cool heads and warm hearts. But please remember this. Scotland did not let you down. Please, I beg you, chers collègues, do not let Scotland down now.
And outside the chamber, this former Belgian Prime Minister, who's meeting Nicola Sturgeon tomorrow, backed continuing EU membership for Scotland if it votes for independence.
If they decide to be independent, they decide to be independent. So, and if they want then to stay into the European Union, they can stay into the European Union. It's their decision.
Stay in without having to join a queue to get in?
Yeah, they are in for the moment, so there's no problem on that side.
Absolute majority. But this analyst, who is now advising the Scottish Government on Brexit, thinks some EU member states would be nervous about Scottish independence.
So it's especially a country like Spain with a secessionist movement in Catalonia, in the Basque country, but also in other countries around Europe where you have regions which at least have a tendency towards secessionism, so for example Belgium.
The First Minister's made clear she's prepared to explore all options to protect Scotland's relationship with the European Union, including independence. She's seeking direct talks with the governments and institutions of the EU, and they'll begin here in Brussels tomorrow when Nicola Sturgeon comes to the Parliament to meet its President, Martin Schulz, amongst others. Glenn Campbell reporting, Scotland, Brussels.
Well, I'm joined now by our political editor, Brian Taylor. Brian, as if the EU debate that's raging across the UK isn't enough, the situation seems to be even more complex here because it's enmeshed with the Scottish independence question.
It is, and to use the phrase that Nicola Sturgeon has been using, it is on the table. It remains on the table alongside whatever alternatives can be devised, either by Nicola Sturgeon's new expert group or in direct talks with the European institutions, or perhaps in cohort with the UK government. I have to say that I've spoken to a lot of people here today at Holyrood in parliamentary positions and also within government. I find very few indeed who think that anything short of an independence referendum and ultimate independence can secure the goals that Nicola Sturgeon has. Remember, she doesn't just want a vague association with the European Union, she wants to be in the European Union.
So what does she hope to achieve in Brussels tomorrow?
It's very early days. It's at this stage, she says, what she's hoping to do at this point in meeting with people in Brussels, including leaders of the various parliamentary groups, is simply to alert them, to put them on the fact on the radar that Scotland voted yes and wants to stay. She simply wants to emphasise that at this stage, then move on over what will be a prolonged period to a series of negotiations. She's seeing the Parliament's President tomorrow. The President of the Council, Donald Tusk, has said that he has got no time tomorrow to see her, but you may well see the President of the Commission later. But at this point, it's simply flagging up the point. Yep, Scotland voted yes and wants to stay in.
Brian, thank you. At Westminster, the political turmoil continues with a Tory leadership battle and a vote of no confidence in the Labour leader, Jeremy Corbyn. Well, within the last hour, the Scottish Labour leader, Kezia Dugdale, had this to say.
I'm the leader of the Scottish Labour Party. I took on this job around about the same time that Jeremy Corbyn was elected UK leader. We went through a similar process and we have a similar mandate. I have 72% of the party membership in Scotland behind me. But if I had just lost 80% of my parliamentary colleagues, I simply could not do my job. And I think it's now extremely difficult for Jeremy Corbyn to continue.
Well, listening to that is our Westminster correspondent David Porter, and more pressure on Mr Corbyn.
Jackie, physically and metaphorically, the storm clouds are gathering here at Westminster this evening, and in particular for Jeremy Corbyn. Those comments by Kezia Dugdale, they mean that she is the most senior Labour elected figure to publicly question whether Mr Corbyn can continue to do his job. And those comments by Kezia Dugdale were prompted by a vote here at Westminster this afternoon in which 3/4 of Jeremy Corbyn's own MPs voted against him, basically saying that they do not have confidence in him as Labour leader. He has said that he will carry on because he has the support of the membership of Labour at large, but it does seem now that a challenge to him is inevitable. And within the last couple of days, 40 or 50 of his front bench team have resigned. As far as Labour MPs are concerned, and it now seems a growing number of MSPs, He is unelectable and he is opposed by most of those in the parliaments.
Thank you very much. Well, we're hosting a special debate, What Now for Scotland, about the EU vote and the implications for the country next Monday night at 7 o'clock right here on BBC One. If you're interested in applying to be in the audience at the BBC in Glasgow, then visit the Reporting Scotland website for more details at bbc.co.uk/Reporting Scotland. Now, tonight's other main news. One of the 3 members of the Scottish Child Abuse Inquiry has resigned from the panel, blaming the Scottish Government for interfering in its work and threatening its independence. Well, our reporter Stephen Godden has been following the story and he's to tell us more. Stephen, so what's happened here?
Well, Jackie, this is the inquiry that was set up last year to investigate the historical abuse of children in care. It's already been the source of tension, some of the survivors believing that its remit isn't wide enough. And today we've had more trouble. A member of the independent panel, Professor Michael Lamb from the University of Cambridge, he's resigned. Now, he did so in a letter to the Education Secretary, John Swinney. He makes a series of strong criticisms. He accuses the Scottish Government of interfering, of delaying the appointment of staff and of questioning decisions of a supposedly independent panel. He says the Scottish Government's actions have doomed the inquiry before the first witness has been heard, leaving him no choice but to step down.
Fairly damning accusations. What's the Scottish Government got to say?
Yeah, strong stuff from him, strong stuff from the Scottish Government as well. They say they're grateful to Professor Lamb for his work, but that they entirely reject his comments. They say that their primary focus is on supporting the inquiry, and with that in mind, they say that survivors have been invited to a ministerial meeting to discuss its progress, and that will take place next week.
Stephen, thank you. 3 children and an adult are still receiving hospital treatment in Glasgow following Sunday's roller coaster crash near Motherwell. 2 of the boys, aged 11 and 12, are still said to be in a serious condition. 3 patients at Wishaw General Hospital are being discharged later. All were taken to hospital after the tsunami ride at M&D's theme park came off the rails. Police in Lanarkshire are treating as attempted murder the shooting of 2 men on a footpath in Hamilton around 2:30 yesterday afternoon. The men, who are both in their 20s, are in hospital, described as being in a serious but stable condition with face, head and chest injuries. Police Scotland's major investigation team is in charge of the inquiry. They say this was a targeted attack and those injured were the intended victims. Pressure is mounting this evening on the leadership of Aberdeen City Council after it was heavily criticised for cremating the bodies of babies with unrelated adults. Some bereaved parents have described the authority as having a lack of empathy towards them. Its chief executive is still refusing to answer questions, as Kevin Keane reports.
It was a life cut short after just a month. Little Scott Wells died from cot death and his ashes were never returned. Like many others, his parents now know it's possible he was cremated with an unrelated adult. And through 3 investigations, Aberdeen City Council has done nothing to support them.
I'm not surprised at all with the way the council have acted. They need to start getting in touch with the parents that are affected by this. They need to start coming out and start answering the questions that have now been opened up more so by the result of the report.
Yesterday, the council's chief executive, Angela Scott, offered an apology, but refused to answer the many questions still hanging.
Do you now need to answer questions?
How complicit was the authority in the cover-up? Why weren't practices investigated fully? Why have parents been left so alone? The national investigation followed the scandal at the Morton Hall Cemetery near Edinburgh, where babies' ashes were scattered without their parents' knowledge. The report focused on 14 crematoria across Scotland, but Aberdeen was by far the worst. And this lawyer says their handling of parents' grief has been equally shocking.
It's an entirely different attitude that Aberdeen City Council have taken to other councils that we're working with, to other crematoria that we're working with. They've taken a very shut down, drawbridge up, closed approach, which shows no regard or empathy to our clients.
We've tried again today to speak to the chief executive of Aberdeen City Council, but we're told she was out of town. Her predecessor, Valerie Watts, who now works in Northern Ireland, has not returned our calls. The elected leader, Councillor Jenny Lang, says the chief executive enjoys her full confidence. She's also declined requests to speak to us. Under mounting pressure, the chief executive will face councillors tomorrow, after which we're told she'll finally take questions. Kevin Keane reporting, Scotland, Aberdeen.
The Education Secretary, John Swinney, has announced a radical plan for Scotland's schools, including cutting paperwork for teachers, devolving power and budgets to schools, and national assessments for primary pupils. Mr Swinney said he would also be sending inspectors into every Scottish local authority to ensure improvements are made. Well, our political correspondent Lucy Adams joins us now from Holyrood. How has this gone down, Lucy?
Well, what we know is that essentially this was a very nuanced speech, but essentially it's a power grab. He's talking about sending inspectors into each one of Scotland's 32 local authorities. The nuance behind that seems to be what you've done so far on your watch in terms of managing schools and education has not been good enough. There's a sweetener in there for teachers in that he talks about reducing paperwork and bureaucracy. But he also says they will plough on with national assessment, despite the threat of industrial action, potentially from those teachers who are concerned that this will lead to targets and league tables across schools. What we can expect from local authorities is that they will not be happy about this. Education falls within their remit. But what the Scottish Government is saying is that Scotland has currently an education gap in terms of the attainment of those from poorer areas as compared to those from wealthier areas. They say this is not acceptable. Mr Swinney said things are out of kilter. They've looked at examples from across the world, including schools in New York, where schools, parents and teachers are far more involved in the overall process. And that, we know, is something that they are keen to use here in Scotland. But for local authorities, we know that this will not go down well. And for many in the education units, there will still be concern about national assessment across the country.
Lucy, thank you. In the build-up to the centenary of the First World War Somme offensive, attention is inevitably turning to the role of Scots in this catastrophic battle. Among the horrendous casualties, one Scottish division suffered the greatest losses, yet most of its men didn't even come from Scotland. They were the men of the Tyneside Scottish battalions, among them the grandfather of our social affairs correspondent, Rival Alderson.
When his country needed him in 1914, Sunderland shipyard worker Jack Ruff answered the call. With family connections in Aberdeen, he volunteered for the newly formed Tyneside Scottish battalions. 2 years later, Jack, along with the rest of the 4,000 men who'd rushed to join the Tyneside Scottish, was sent over the top in the Battle of the Somme. It was a disaster. 60,000 men killed in a day. The Tyneside Scottish Division suffered more casualties than any other, well over half their strength killed, wounded or missing. Today, it's these cadets in Newcastle who carry the name of the Tyneside Scottish, a unique golden thread linking them to the men who fought at the Somme. Of all of the volunteer battalions raised as part of Lord Kitchener's new army, only the Tyneside Scottish retains its name and cap badge in today's army. A link between these youngsters and my grandpa, who was wounded in the Somme 100 years ago. The cadets who wear the Tyneside Scottish badge on their Balmoral caps have researched their illustrious history.
By learning all this stuff, you can pass it on to the younger generation, and then obviously soldiers' lives live on.
They would have to go over that top. They would have to face all those bullets that are like forcing towards them. It's like a life and front and death situation, whereas we just they complain just like getting told to wake up at 6 o'clock in the morning, whereas they were getting told 2 o'clock in the morning, 3 o'clock in the morning, every single night.
Many of those who joined the Tyneside Scottish had connections north of the border. Others were simply keen to embrace the Scots fighting traditions, which live on.
It has this kind of international recognition factor. It's the idea of being a Scottish soldier and having that heritage behind you is something that still means something.
Perhaps it's inevitable the name of the Tyneside Scots would live on. Their motto is harder than hammers, because while you could break a hammer, you could never break the spirit of the Tyneside Scots. Rival Alderson reporting, Scotland, Newcastle.
Now, time to get up to date with today's sports news, and let's go to Rona.
Thank you very much, Jackie. Good evening to you. Yes, it was time today for Andy Murray to begin this year's Wimbledon campaign, and it was against another British player. So did it all go as smoothly as expected for the world's number 2? Well, our reporter Kerdine Idsan is standing in the rain at the All England Club.
Yes, good evening from Wimbledon, where the weather has turned nasty. But this wet stuff was just a distant forecast earlier on when Andy Murray came onto centre court, hoping to get his Wimbledon campaign off to the best possible start. Centre stage on centre court, but would there be any opening night nerves? Surely the other actor in this all-British drama wouldn't hog the spotlight. No stage fright at all from the world number 2 initially. Though if assistant coach Jamie Delgado has hay fever, he could be in for a long fortnight on the Wimbledon grass. No sign of any allergies from Andy, as the first set was claimed in well under half an hour. With well over 200 places separating them in the world rankings, this was a mismatch on paper and on the All England Club's best-kept lawn. Stockport's most famous son is Fred Perry. The town's latest tennis player did his best to pay tribute. But in under an hour, Liam Brodie found himself a set away from the Wimbledon trapdoor. We saw flashes of Brodie brilliance, but by far the greater consistency and variety came from the Scot. The lesser-known Brit battled bravely, but in just under an hour and 3/4, Andy Murray was safely through to round 2. A nice ovation for both actors as they left the stage. Andy Murray's curtain call comes on Thursday against Yen-Sun Liu of Chinese Taipei.
Coming out there was pretty breezy at the beginning, and obviously Liam, never played each other before, although we practiced a lot, and it's not that easy playing someone that you know so well, but I did okay.
So a straight sets win for Andy Murray, exactly what he would have wanted. He's back in action on Thursday against Yen-Sun Liu from Chinese Taipei. He's inside the top 100, so it will be more of a test than Liam Brodie. His main claim to fame, he knocked Andy Murray out of the Beijing Olympics back in 2008. I don't expect a repeat of that in a couple of days' time.
Indeed. Well, the new manager has made his first signing. Celtic have signed Moussa Dembele from Fulham on a 4-year deal beginning in the 1st of July. The 19-year-old French youth international scored 17 goals for Fulham last season. The striker is Brendan Rodgers' first purchase and will join his teammates for pre-season training in Slovenia. The coach of Olympic badminton player Kirsty Gilmore says it's ridiculous that he won't be with her in Rio. Two-time Olympian Chris Brule has coached Gilmore to qualification for the Summer Games. But as Jane Lewis reports, the Dutchman has criticised the policy of the sport's governing body, which means he won't be part of Team GB.
He's been by her side during this Olympic qualifying campaign.
And she has to compensate.
Guiding her from 15th in the world from 37th this time last year. A two-time Olympian himself, but he won't be in Rio as a coach.
I think anyone can think about if that's the best for Kirsty. It's just a system you have here in the UK.
Do you have that in Holland?
Of course not.
And that works better, you think?
We laugh about it. I think it's ridiculous.
GB Badminton has responded. Their performance director, John Austin, told us, "There's limited accreditations in Rio for badminton, as there is for all sports. We have to consider how best to support the whole team, which means we are not in a position to cater for individual coaches. We will be sending 3 coaches to the Olympics, all of whom will support the GB badminton team across the 5 events."
Working with Chris has been really good over the last couple of years, but yeah, inevitably I will be working with the GB coaches come the games, which is a bit of a change, but yeah, I'm really ready to work with them down there, and we've had some experiences at the other tournaments to get ready for that.
While Gilmore seems relaxed with the situation, her coach isn't convinced. But could his complaints lead to a change of thinking?
No, because that's the system, and they won't change that. I can only make sure that she has the best preparation ever for her Olympics, and I think we take it, in that matter, we take it in the most positive way we can.
Frustrating though?
Of course.
Frustrating for him, A time for focus for her.
Yes, apologies there, all this talk of GB separation. It became Team G
and B.
B.
Thank you very much. Well, just before the weather, here's Shelley Joffrey with details of tonight's Scotland 2016.
Well, another tumultuous day as last week's Leave vote continues to sink in. Nigel Farage is booed in Brussels. The SNP gets a standing ovation. At Westminster, Labour's leader loses the confidence of his own MPs. We'll have all the reaction and analysis over on BBC Two at 10:30.
Well, it seems to have been raining everywhere we've been tonight. What's in store, Kozo?
Jackie, well, cloudy and a bit grey, I'm afraid. It has been quite cloudy and grey for many of us today with outbreaks of showery rain. And as we head through the rest of the evening, we'll continue to see some showers for a time. And you can see from the pressure chart, we have low pressure not too far away from us and weather front after weather front coming in off the Atlantic on westerly winds. And that'll be the case for the next few days. We have seen some quite impressive shower clouds, this from one of our weather watchers in Highland, and it will stay rather cloudy for most of the evening, but those showers will very gradually start to ease as we head through the night, and we'll see some clearer spells developing. The showers still quite widespread, but becoming mainly confined towards the north as we head through the night. Some clearer spells developing for central and southern parts, and temperatures are holding on to double figures, so around maybe 8 to 12 Celsius. For some sheltered glens, maybe down to 5 or 6 degrees, a bit cooler perhaps in some rural areas, and the winds remaining light. So for tomorrow morning then, well, a largely dry start with a few showers in the north, but here comes one of those weather fronts pushing into the southwest and spreading further across the south as we head into the day, and by the afternoon becoming quite wet here. So let's take a closer look at 4 o'clock. A very different day for Shetland compared to today. Today, bright spells, some sunshine. Tomorrow, cloudy and damp. Across the north, a few brighter spells, some sunshine in places, but also some heavy showers, the odd rumble of thunder perhaps, and temperatures in the mid to high teens. And for central and southern areas here, we have that weather front, but will gradually tend to pull away as we head into the evening to allow some brighter spells to develop further across the west as we head through to the evening. Now here's that weather front clearing away, and it will become dry for a time, but there is another weather front waiting in the wings to come through for Thursday later on in the day. So for that Thursday itself, it looks to be another mixture of some brighter spells, some sunshine, but also some scattered heavy showers, and the winds are picking up a bit, so a fresher breeze for Thursday. And temperature-wise, well, again, around average for the time of year. 14 to maybe 15 degrees. And here's that weather front that will come through later on in the day, bringing with it some outbreaks of heavier rain. And that's your forecast.
Thank you, Kozo. And now just time for a reminder of tonight's main news. A majority of MSPs have given a mandate to the First Minister so she can seek to protect Scotland's relationship with the European Union. A process of shuttle diplomacy will now begin, with Nicola Sturgeon going to Brussels tomorrow. We're back with our late evening news at 10:25. Until then, from all the team here, enjoy the rest of your evening. Bye-bye.